Look, man, I just don't see it. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today what I want to do is talk about some basic principles when it comes to data visualization. And just so you're not disappointed with this video, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about analytical techniques today. I'm talking about some basic principles about presenting visual information to human beings. The kind of thing that you need to take into consideration no matter who you are or who you're briefing. All right, just to get started, let's think about the fundamental data visualization challenge. You have to get information from an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper into the brain of a decision maker. And of the 5 senses that you can leverage for this data transmission, well, vision is about the only one that you're going to be able to work with. Maybe you could describe the data in such a way that people can hear the point you're trying to convey, but they certainly are not going to be able to touch it or smell it or lick it. And so, since we have to rely on vision to get information into a decision maker's brain, there's a couple of things that we have to understand about human vision. And today, I'm just going to focus on the 3 biggest ones: nearsightedness, color vision, and eye saccades. First barrier to communicating information that you're going to run into is simple nearsightedness. As people age, their vision has a tendency to decline from a nice, clear, crisp image to kind of seeing the world in a fuzzy way. And what's more, a lot of people, maybe a lot of military men, are in denial about the decline of their visual acuity. That means that by the time you get to the Pentagon and you're briefing a room full of 50-year-old people, there's lots of folks who are seeing the world about like the right side of this chart, and they don't realize it. And that means that as you're developing your briefing materials, you have to recognize that if not the decision maker, certainly important people on their staff are experiencing visual decline. So you gotta be careful about relying too much on tiny text or small images. In fact, one of the things that I would say is that the popularity of handout slides or read-aheads is simply that folks who have trouble seeing the screen can hold that paper close to their face and see what you're talking about. The next barrier to communicating data visually is color blindness. Now, the fact of the matter is there are a lot of different types of color blindness. And as you can see from this slide, some versions are not so severe that they make it completely impossible for people to interpret color. However, a remarkable number of men, about 8%, have some version of color blindness. So when you work in a place like a military headquarters, where a large percentage of the decision makers are men, you can be certain that you're going to be briefing people who can't see color. Now, at one point, I was lucky enough to work for an older gentleman who was colorblind, and he constantly reminded people that he couldn't see color and you had to build the slides so he could understand them. And so, because of his constant reminding, I learned to put the word red or yellow or green inside a colored box. Sometimes I'd do a little circle with an R or Y or G, just so that he knew what was being communicated to the rest of the audience. But I've also worked with people who didn't really know that they had a color blindness problem. In fact, I've shown this to some audiences where there's somebody who goes, I don't see any difference between the one on the left and the one on the right. No kidding, buddy. That's because you're colorblind. But the point is that sometimes it's best to just assume that some part of your audience is colorblind and apply some mitigating techniques ahead of time. Now, one thing I will say is that the default color palette that's used in Microsoft Office products tends to be designed to mitigate the effect of some mild forms of color blindness. Personally, I've never been a fan of these default palettes, but at the same time, it's helpful to understand exactly why Microsoft picked them in the first place. The final example of a challenge of getting visual information through a set of human eyes is what's called eye saccades. And I gotta be honest, This one is a little bit funny because when people first learn about it, they're surprised to realize that it even exists. In effect, when your eyeballs move, your brain edits out a few microseconds of the resulting image. And this process of editing out information tends to disrupt your memory of what you were looking at just before your eyeballs moved. In fact, this little foible about how the human brain processes visual information is the basis of those children's games where you have to find the differences between two images. Now, most people, when they look at this slide, it'll take them a bit of time to find the differences between the two pictures because they have to move their eye back and forth. And every time they do that, their brain loses a bit of information. Now, there's a fun experiment you can do at home with this, where you stare into a mirror and focus on one of your pupils, either the left or the right. And then you shift your focus to the other pupil. You will notice that to your brain, it appears that your eyes have flicked instantaneously. And that's because your brain is editing out the move. Go ahead, try to move your eyes as slow as you can. It always seems instantaneous. Now, you might ask, so what? Well, the real point here is that if you force your viewers to flick their eyes between slides or even just move around on a single slide, they will experience a difficulty in keeping track of what they're supposed to be seeing. In fact, one of the tricks is to overlay information so that their eyes don't have to move. So in this slide, what I've done is I've overlaid the two images so we can flick between them. Here, your eyes don't have to move, and the differences between the two images, they seem to pulsate. Sometimes you'll see somebody in the back of a briefing flicking slides like this, and that's exactly what they're doing. Now, data visualization is an incredibly deep and complex field that we could spend hours on. But today, I just wanted to focus on some very basic things so we had a clear understanding of the challenges associated with getting information into a human brain. If you're interested, we can talk about some tactics and techniques to improve your visual communication. But one of the great places to get started is with the work of a gentleman by the name of Dan Roam. And if you're interested why I do not like the work of Edward Tufte, watch this video.